Rachelle Delaney, and I am the author of 8 novels for middle grade readers, and I live in Vancouver, British Columbia. So my newest middle grade novel is this one. It's called Alice Fleck's Recipes for Disaster, and it tells the story of 12-year-old Alice, who agrees to enter what she thinks is going to be a friendly cooking competition with her father, only to find out that she's actually competing on a cutthroat new reality TV cooking series that's judged by the most famous and fierce judge on TV, whose name is Tom Trufelman. So Alice's father is a culinary historian, which means he studies the history of food. And she's been helping him recreate meals from the past her entire life. But she likes to keep this hobby secret from other kids because she finds that they don't always understand the appeal of creating meals or creating old-fashioned things like homemade gelatin using cow's feet. So when she finds out that she's going to be competing for the entire world to see, she's terrified. And to make matters worse, she learns that there is some sabotage happening behind the scenes of the show. There's someone who is playing tricks on the competitors and making this competition even harder than it already is. So Alice has to team up with a few new friends to figure out who is sabotaging the show, all the while competing in it. And I should add that all of this takes place at a Victorian reenactment festival. Inspiration for the book came from a few different places, and I will tell you about 3 of them. So the first one was a podcast that I heard several years ago. And in it, the hosts were learning to cook a peacock, the way that medieval nobles would have cooked a peacock, using spices that only very rich people in the Middle Ages would have had. And at one point, the host decided to call up a culinary historian for help. And that set off a little spark for me. I love learning about people with interesting careers, and I didn't know that there were people out there who recreate meals from the past as a job. So that was the first little spark for me. And meanwhile, I was starting to watch more competitive cooking shows, like many of us are doing these days. My favorite is The Great British Bake Off. And I find these shows really interesting, not just because of the food, the delicious or sometimes disastrous food that people cook on the shows, but I also like to watch the relationships between the competitors, and I find it interesting to think about the details that the production crew chooses to include. Because we all know that what we see on these shows isn't like the full story. They really pick and choose the details that they want viewers to know, so the competitors come off in a certain way. So I guess that was my second source of inspiration, was competitive cooking on TV. And the third thing I was thinking about was historic reenactment festivals. So when people come together and pretend like they're living in a different time period, I find that fascinating. So people will wear the clothes from that time period. They'll do like activities that people would have done. So if you went to like a Victorian festival, like Alice Fleck does reluctantly in the novel, you might spend your days dressed in Victorian costume, doing things that the Victorians did. And in Alice's case, one of those things is communing with the dead. She's not enthused about it. So I guess I wanted to bring all of these sources of inspiration together. Alice's father is the culinary historian, and Alice is his assistant, or sous chef, as he likes to say. So we get lots of great stories about the past as they cook together. Her father is full of stories. And they end up at this Victorian festival, which is kind of a weird and funny backdrop. They're thinking that they'll be making Victorian food in a friendly little cooking competition that nobody will see. But that's where modern life comes in. And it turns out to be a really modern reality TV show, like the ones that we watch on TV today. So the past meets the present in a way that I think is pretty fun. And I did a ton of research for this book, which I love to do for my novels. Sometimes doing the research is my favorite part of writing. So I read lots of articles and listened to lots of podcasts about Victorian times, about culinary history, and about cooking shows. I also took lessons in something called bartitsu, which is like a Victorian martial art that's featured in the book. And I interviewed someone who created or who competed on the Great Canadian Baking Show because I wanted to make sure that I was getting some good competitive cooking details for the novel. Let's see. I found lots of great stories to incorporate as well. And maybe I'll tell you one of my favorites that is featured in the novel. So it's about a boy whose name is Marie-Antoine Carême. And he was known as arguably the world's first celebrity chef. So he was born in Paris in the 1700s, and he was actually abandoned by his parents during the French Revolution. So he started working in a kitchen by the time that he was 8 years old. And when he was 15 years old, he was apprenticed to a famous pastry chef who not only taught him all about pastry, but also taught him to read and write. So Carême started going to the library and reading about things like art and architecture. And all of these things started to inspire him in the kitchen. So he began to build pastry sculptures in the shape of the things that he read about. He would create pastry sculptures of like temples and pyramids and ancient ruins. And people started coming from far and wide to see these sculptures. So he became quite famous, a celebrity chef. And he really serves as inspiration for Alice at one point in the story. His story really helps her get through a particularly challenging part in culinary combat. So if you are curious to find out more about my many sources of inspiration, I actually have a list of books and articles and podcasts on my website, which is RachelleDelaney.com. There will soon be an educator's guide for Alice Fleck's recipes for disaster, and it will be on the Tundra Books website, which is tundrabooks.com. And educators will be able to find discussion questions and ideas for fun activities. Just one example is that students will be prompted to research the history and origins of one of their favorite foods, which is something that I did a lot of while I was researching for Alice Fleck's recipes for disaster. So if you like Alice Fleck's recipes for disaster, you might also like the book Clairvoyant, also by me, published in 2018. And this book is about a 12-year-old girl who really wants to be an investigative journalist and is kind of a no-nonsense person. So when she gets stuck writing horoscopes for her school newspaper, she is quite upset. It's not what she wants to be doing with her life. But then all of her horoscopes start to come true, and she starts to question whether she might have the ability to tell the future, which is something that she never thought existed. So yeah, if you like Alice Fleck, you might want to check out Clairvoyant as well. I'm always available for virtual author visits. I absolutely love talking to middle grade readers in classrooms and libraries. You can get in touch with me on my website, which is RachelleDelaney.com. So that's a bit about me. I am Rachelle Delaney, and this is my brand new middle grade novel, Alice Fleck's Recipes for Disaster. Thank you so much for listening.